We will be joined by remarkable leaders in all sorts of areas, from the corporate world to sports to the arts, basically talking about the challenges that leaders and managers face in the modern world of work. You know, we're seeing so much fallout off the back of the pandemic of, you know, challenges for leaders in keeping people engaged, retaining quality, you know, recruiting the best talent. All of these things are real issues, and add to that the challenge of a hybrid world where, you know, how do you engage a team and connect a team and create a culture when half of your staff are at home and half are in the office, or whatever the case may be. So I'm very excited today to be joined by, today has a very American feel to it, a very US based feel to it. I'm joined by three people that I'm really excited to talk to. The first person is Marius Smyth. Marius is a CRO in a company called AdRoll in New York City. AdRoll are part of the Next Role group, who are data-generated marketing, targeted marketing company, and Marius can explain all that better. Marius is a seasoned global revenue and GTM leader with over 19 years of scaling SaaS products, and he also likes to kind of spend a little bit of time dabbling in angel investing. So I think it'll be a really interesting conversation with Marius to understand where he comes from, the point of view of actually leading teams. We're also joined by Amanda Hammett. Amanda is the CEO of Core Elevation. She was given the brilliant title by some students she worked with many years ago of Millennial Translator. And where Amanda's expertise is in helping companies to recruit and retain next generation talent. And she's really particularly interesting when she talks about what it is, you know, instead of us fearing millennials and Gen Zers and whatever else, is understanding what they bring to the table and how the future world of work has to adapt to the expectations of a whole different workforce. And then finally, we're joined by the wonderful Bennie Fowler. Bennie, a really good friend of mine, an absolute legend, Super Bowl winner with the Denver Broncos in Super Bowl 50, I believe, Bennie. He also has the unique talent or the unique identifier as being the last person to catch a scoring pass from Peyton Manning. It's quite a nice thing to hang off your name. But Bennie is also building a reputation now as one of the leading executive coaches and leadership coaches in America. And I think he has an awful lot of interesting insight into what managers and leaders have to deal with on a day-to-day basis, or what they're sharing with him. So guys, you're all very welcome. It's lovely to see you all. I'm very excited by the fact that all of that intro has taken me a couple of minutes, so I'm going to shut up now and let you guys on the stage. My first question, I'm going to throw it out to you, Marius, probably to start with, but I think what we might do is just let it free flow and you guys jump in anytime you want. I'm looking at the challenges, you know, like there's an awful lot of conversation about attrition and turnover and, you know, exhausting recruitment cycles and the expense of recruitment and all these different things at the moment. And I think as a leader, obviously there's more sense in retaining your best people than having to constantly churn people and go in and out of the market. But what do you feel like from what you've seen with AdRoll and let's face it, the world fell off a cliff a couple of years ago, and we've all had to adjust and adapt and learn new skills and learn new ways of relating with each other. But how have you guys managed the culture side of things and keep people engaged to try and retain your best people?
Yeah, really good question, Niall. A good one to start off with. First of all, I'd just like to say I'm really looking forward to learning something from Bennie and Amanda. Given those introductions, it sounds like I'm going to be able to learn quite a bit from you guys.
Same.
Yeah, we find ourselves, I think, back at the beginning of the pandemic, we found ourselves right at the coal face Niall, in terms of not just, I mean, like as you mentioned, not just, trying to engage, a workforce or a team or, or teams that were actually in a state of shock. But we also had to think about, we had to think about a multitude of things along a spectrum, everything from how do we go out now and recruit folks in a fully remote work environment? How do we, help them learn and develop in that crucial early stage of their, onboarding into the company? And then how do we close the loop and actually retain them, within that type of environment as well? So some of the things that I've sort of learned over the last 2 years, and again, it's a very short space of time with a very few data points, but certainly I think we're in a place where essentially the time that you're going to have these individuals with you is likely to be shorter. It definitely is currently, and it is likely to be shorter going forward as well. The average tenure of someone within my organization now has dropped well below 18 months that it was before. I mean, we obviously had, again, folks that stayed longer, right down to, some folks really only spending 10 months, 11 months, 12 months. So for the first big challenge that, sort of brings is that you've got to start to think about the economics of recruiting. You've got to start to think about the economics of actually how you run that process right through, like I said, to the early life onboarding experience, right through the retention of your your overall workforce and teams as well. For me, that's a big, and for me, I don't have a baseline. I don't have a baseline yet in terms of what that needs to look like. We've had recruitment drives. We've employed lots of folks thinking about that early stage, and we've also put lots of attention into retention as well. So we simply just don't have a baseline in terms of what we're going to need to deal with going forward. On the economic side, I think that then bleeds into how do you think about folks that are only really learning your organization in that first sort of 6 to 9 months? How do you really think about giving them a rich cultural experience in such a short space of time, trying to onboard them as quickly as you possibly can, give them that cultural experience so you can actually retain them as well. So you've got to really think hard about that. And then on the retention side, again, I still don't have a baseline. We're coming out of this period where I'm still shocked by folks that come to me, to my office hours, and tell me that they're leaving the company, even though they've been, they've had a fantastic experience in terms of recruiting. They may be with us for some time, and they've also had a great experience in terms of cultural engagement, but they've just got other options, or they just have other things that they, they feel that they are empowered to go do now, given the remote environment as well. So it's a really difficult one to manage through. As leaders, I think you just have to be open and honest and sort of, just talk about that as a challenge. As a leader of an organization or a leader of a team, you don't have the answers. You're still working to try and find a baseline in this environment as well. And but hopefully, again, more data in terms of what our teams are doing, people are doing, learning from those experiences from folks, getting their feedback is going to help us and put us in a stronger position, I think.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? And Amanda, it's interesting there where Marius touched on there at the end about the recruitment and the kind of the turnover, and like there is a perception, like, let's face it, hearing it for years about the millennials and that snowflake generation, all that kind of stuff, and easily offended, and you have to kind of like, they have to have nap pods and slides and all this kind of stuff. Actually, what's really interesting for me is I saw an article recently. I actually shared it on my LinkedIn page. It was a study by McKinsey, where they were saying that the things that people were looking for, the things that were retaining them, were social cohesion, trust, and purpose.
Yeah.
And when you think about that, that is like, and Bennie can speak to this in a minute, because that is at the heart of every high-performing team, and that's what I found in my career. But isn't it just the case, or is it your experience that for the kids coming out of college now, that kind of idea of purpose, trust, social cohesion is the key to them engaging.
Absolutely. That's not fluffy. That's real life. We all want to feel connected, and adding in these video screens has made it more difficult than eye to eye connections. Human beings were actually, hardwired to want to connect. That's the purpose of our eyeballs, actually, is for use of connecting human to human. It creates chemical reactions in your brain. And it's hard to replicate that in a hybrid workforce, but that's how we build trust. That's how we build a social cohesion and purpose. Well, as leaders, we got to show purpose every single day. We've got to relate that not just to ourselves, but to our entire team. And that includes your early in career talent, whether it's your Gen Zs, your millennials, whoever it may be. That's your job. Flat out, that's your job. So.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's interesting because it's something that Bennie and I have spoken about a lot in the past, but I would have seen it with the great leaders in sport that I've worked with, and they didn't necessarily, like, there is this perception, that when we talk about, like, I'm a great believer in leaders who care. I use that phrase all the time, and straight away you get this reaction of, oh Jesus, here we go. Now we're all going to be toasting s'mores, sitting around the campfire, it's all going to be lovely, we all love each other. And it actually isn't. I mean, there's leaders like, in English football, there is a very famous manager called Alex Ferguson who had a hugely successful career managing Manchester United. A very gruff character and an incredibly tough guy to work for. But the one thing that every player knew of playing under him was that he told them what he thought. They knew exactly where they stood in the team makeup. They all knew their role, and they all got feedback on exactly where they were at. Which means if you're not playing, there's less room for you to go away and bitch and moan and be kind of a negative person who drags the team down. I found that fascinating. Bennie, from your perspective with some of the, you've worked with some great leaders, and obviously, the Broncos being the pinnacle, but you've worked with, like, you've played at some of the biggest franchises in the NFL, and you've worked with remarkable leaders all around. From that point of view of that kind of idea of social cohesion, trust, and purpose, what was it about, we'll just say, for example, the Broncos and that incredibly successful season you guys had when you went and won Super Bowl 50? What was it about that brought you guys together, and what were they the kind of principles or the main kernels of what it was you were doing?
Yeah, I think it's something that Amanda and Marius have already said. It's that engagement that you need to have. You have to be able to engage those employees or people from the start. I remember Gary Kubiak, who was the head coach of the Broncos the year we won the Super Bowl. We had just went 12-4 as a team the year before. We had the #1 seed. We lost in the first round, and they fired our head coach. You don't fire your head coach after being the #1 seed and having 13 Pro Bowlers. And we come into the next year, they fire the head coach. We hire Gary Kubiak, and he comes in and he engages us immediately and saying, hey, everybody thinks the Super Bowl is won in February, but it actually begins right now. And then he broke down the process of, like, hey, this is how we're going to attack this. And we're going to win the days. And that will lead to winning the weeks. That will lead to winning the months. That will lead to winning the year. But let's take it one day at a time. We cannot win the Super Bowl in week 1. Mm-hmm. So I think when CEOs and leaders are onboarding new people, showing that progression of how this person will progress in this role is important. I think that's one of the most important things. When I was playing with Sean Payton in New Orleans, he broke it down to me. He said, hey, you've been a B+ player. I need you to be an A+ special teams player. And hey, maybe I can get you in on offense. I would run through a wall for Sean Payton because he was very transparent and honest on how I could progress on this team. And I think that's one of the most important things that leaders can do, is that they feel like their process of onboarding somebody is going so great and they're just adding task on top of task on top of task. Just give this person one simple thing to do well in the next 2 or 14 days or a month. Let them understand what they need to do to be successful. And I think, after the first month, then their desk they have piles of paperwork and things that they have to do, and they haven't been fully onboarded. So I think taking that time, that's one of the things that Amanda and Marius were harping on, is that engagement. And you can't just engage somebody and say, hey, really nice to meet you, and here is where everything is, and hope you feel comfortable. And then you introduce people. You have to be able to follow up and follow in and check in with these people. I think that's important.
Absolutely right. Yes.
You know, can I add a little something to what Bennie just said? What I thought was really interesting was that, you know, he's absolutely right. There are these, we expect to onboard somebody, and this was the old school, onboard somebody. All right, this is what you need to know. Go do your job. That's it. It's not like that anymore. There needs to be a lot more engagement. There needs to be one-on-one time with these leaders, consistent check-ins, which sounds like is exactly what Bennie experienced himself. Consistent check-ins. This is what you're doing. This is what you're doing well. Hey, this is what you need to tweak. We don't see that a lot at different leadership levels. So
that's such a good point. And I was just going to share a slide, and then Marius, I'll let you come in on that.
Thanks, Niall.
We were just looking at the cost of replacing an employee. There was a Gallup poll done recently. Estimates the cost of replacing an employee is 1.5 to 2 times the employee's annual salary. You know, so that if you lose an employee who's on $70,000, it could cost you up to $140,000 to replace them, which is insane, especially if there's something you can do to keep them. And Marius, from your perspective with that, and coming on to Amanda's point, there is something I feel where onboarding a new hire, that almost you're building this kind of I don't understand how we don't kind of build in kind of understanding like physical and workplace and emotional and mental well-being as part of your onboarding process. I feel like we lose a lot of talent because the onboarding process, I mean, let's be honest, like quite often the first thing you get is a contract from HR, which explains to you the things that will get you fired. You know, it's not the warmest welcome to a company. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first and foremost, I think the process and policy, which I think you're talking about, Niall, right? It absolutely has a place, but it can't be the experience, right? That cannot be the experience. It can't be your onboarding experience is one that is process heavy, policy led. I would come back to the what Bennie said and Amanda backed up. I would argue that purpose it's the clarity of purpose in that early period that you're coming into an organization, making it extremely clear that the role that the individual team member does has there's a clear purpose in not just in the day-to-day, sort of what they do, but that it actually links to a much larger vision, a much larger goal. One of the things that I employ is that every single person that joins my organization gets time with me, right? Whether that's in sometimes it is in a group setting because we do onboard folks, sort of in larger groups, or maybe it is a one-to-one conversation. But I tell them in that session, and it generally happens within the first 3 weeks of them coming into the organization. I tell them within that session who I am, what I stand for, the things that I stand for, the principles that guide me as a leader, and then where that fits into the organization overall. And I make a commitment to everybody as well, right? What I say to everyone is, I said, my commitment to you is I'm going to stand up these principles, values, the things that I've shared with you in this first interaction with me. If you see me not, living up to those things, if you see me, not displaying these things, or anybody on my leadership team, frankly, then the commitment is that you can come to me. You should come to me. And you can call it out, and you can call anybody else who's not living up to the values principles that we talk about in that first session. It really, really helps for me. It really, really helps set the tone, and it really helps them understand, get to know me as a leader, and also brings what I hope, and I've certainly got feedback on it, is a clarity of purpose, right? In terms of what what everybody's here to do. I actually also go into quite a bit of detail around what clearly what I'm here to do, and that isn't to to shout the odds and to tell people what to do. I really am just a facilitator. As a CRO, I am essentially just helping them do their role, do their job better. And that's what I that's the commitment I make. I think the earlier you can give that clarity of purpose, the earlier you can hit the 3 pillars that you mentioned in terms of what people value in that onboarding process. And I mean right up front, the better the experience is going to be, the better engagement that you're going to get. As Benny's mentioned, it's like the tone is set. Everybody knows why they're here, what they're here to do. It's really, really important that happens very, very early on in an experience.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? And it's kind of, it leads me to that kind of headspace where, great leaders create great teams. And when we talk about, I'm always fascinated by conversation around culture. And I've given a lot of talks over the years where people have said to me, how did the teams you worked with create these great cultures? And they talk about culture as if it's some mystical thing that needs to be kind of, you need to go to a mountain and find your Zen kind of thing. And for me, it's always been about relationships. And I feel like, and this is something, Amanda, I'd love to get your opinion on, but I feel like the key element of a great leader is somebody who asks questions rather than to be somebody who tells people what to do. I mean, I never understand the point of hiring somebody who's an expert in their field and then telling them what to do. Surely the logical thing is sit back, ask the questions, let them flow. Your perspective of what you've learned, and particularly when again, I think about, we talk about Gen Zers, and I know that's not your only area of expertise, to be fair to you. I'm not trying to pigeonhole you or anything.
Okay.
But when we think about we'll say the graduate generation that are coming out or have come out the last couple of years with different expectations, and off the back of the pandemic, people now have probably more than ever have an expectation of having a life as well as a career. Whereas in the past, your career was everything for the first 20 years. And you kind of worried about when you're retired, you get time to do all this stuff. Now people are thinking, well, if I can work at home, I can do stuff and still be really productive. With all of that in mind, I suppose, what's your sense from what you've seen and what you work on and what you're finding with companies?
It's really interesting because I'm seeing this really interesting push and pull in between leaders and young talent. I cannot tell you how many times a week I hear the words, I just can't wait for things to go back to the way they used to be.
Yeah.
And let me just be very frank and clear with you. That is not happening. This change was always coming. The pandemic just put us on the express train and it was no turning back from there. So that is absolutely not going to happen. But also Gen Zs, younger millennials, Gen Zs that are coming fresh out of university right now, they have different expectations. These were the children of boomers who were workaholics. The word workaholic was termed by boomers to describe themselves because their identity became their job. Mm-hmm. The millennials, young millennials and Gen Zs, they don't want any part of that. That also leaked into Gen X. And so it became a real cultural problem at home and at work. So millennials, Gen Zs, they want no part of that. They want to actually have a life. They want to experience life as well as work. They want it to be integrated into one. And that is something that we need to reimagine as we're working on our, hybrid plans. It doesn't necessarily have to be 9 to 5, does it? I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
In your industry, does it have to be 9 to 5? Maybe, maybe not. I have people on my team that they are geniuses at 2 a.m. Please do not contact me. I will not be helping you at 2 a.m. But they send me like loads of these creative ideas and they have written out all these like huge statements and they're wonderful. But that's like their zone of genius. And you know what? I'm happy to let them run with it. But that's the thing is as leaders, we need to recognize how can we create a cohesive culture for everyone that works for all of us. It can be done. We just have to kind of get out of that mind frame of this is the way we work. We no longer live in this box. The cubicle walls are gone.
Yeah, it's true. I cheap plug here, but I have a podcast show called Works Broken. Works Broken is because I just kind of feel like we've been following this industrial revolution model of 9 to 5 months right now. Obviously, this is a very middle class view of white collar work, and there's all sorts of different areas of work. But that kind of idea that we're kind of 9 to 5, Monday to Friday, it doesn't stand up anymore. And I interviewed a woman recently called Sam White, who is an entrepreneur, runs a bunch of insurance companies, really, really smart lady. Great fun too, actually, in fairness to her. But Sam set up an insurance company in Australia. And one of the first things she did was fire herself as CEO. And she had a corporate psychologist working with her as a coach. And she hired him. She said the problem where she was getting bogged down was she kept thinking about having to hire somebody with experience of CEO role or whatever. Mm-hmm. She said she realized that every conversation she had with this guy just lit a fire in her, and it made her think about something, and it was really different. And the reason it was different was because he kept asking her questions. Mm-hmm. And she said, right, what if? So she hired him as CEO with the remit that you don't make any decisions. So he sits in a senior leadership meeting and basically throws a question out there and gets the senior leadership team to come to a conclusion where they make a decision on where they're going, or somebody in the team is given the role of, right, you're deciding where we go with this. And their productivity has gone through the roof because the CEO is not leading, or sorry, he's not dictating. He's leading by sitting back and giving them the power. And it's just thinking about things in a different way. And it's we had something there, a slide talking about like the thing that we were looking at. The number one reason why people were leaving the employment they were in was because of the relationship with their manager. And you look at the kind of things that you've got: work-life balance, recognition, compensation. Like every manager polled by Gallup when they did this survey, every manager, their number one reason why they thought people left was compensation, was money. Mm-hmm. Compensation was down the list, but the relationship with their manager was massive. And it's just
it's quite often a challenge to get to really get a proper sense of why a person is leaving an organization.
Yeah, but the exit poll.
Yeah, until after the fact, right?
Yeah.
And this is why this data is actually so important. It does actually help an awful lot to understand, sort of across a population what it looks like. Because again, it's going to be really, really challenging to get the right answer. When I'm told by a team member that it's compensation, I do dismiss that straight away, and I sort of say, look, it's probably not, because I think we're as competitive as sort of the next company that looks like us. And sometimes there's nothing you can do about compensation anyway. But for the most part, it's a deeper, and as you go down that list, it means more and more, right? I would sort of, the top 2 or 3 are real hygiene factors. They're things that, okay, I just need these things, I have to get them right. The last one is a relationship, and I think if that one isn't right, it doesn't matter about the others really. I mean, you'd be banging your head against a brick wall trying to solve the other things if you don't have that one right. And it's coachable. The beauty of the last one is that you can actually coach, folks to be better at relationships, to folks to be better at, at managing individuals and teams. It's really coachable.
This is so interesting, because this is so against the world that I come from, in terms of, it is what it is when you come into an NFL organization. There's 1,000 people that want this job. So you're not just going to leave and say, oh, hey, I'm done because of work-life balance. And that's one of the things that I've learned in the corporate space, is that you do have to come from a place as a leader of understanding and empathy. I think Amanda and Marius, hit incredible points, but if I could sum their points up into one, I think one of the most important things, especially for my age group, which is millennials, Gen Z, and the generations that are coming after that, is helping people connect to that purpose at work. And Marius just talked about it in terms of coaching them and how they can find and see their purpose at work. That's one of the most important things. I've had incredible job offers to work in a corporate setting that I will not take, because I can't see, they can't help me connect that purpose to what I would actually be doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think that's one of the reasons, or one of the most important things that I can point out, with the millennials and Gen Zs, is how can they find that purpose at work? Amanda talked about it. Work doesn't have to be so rigid. unless you work in an organization where there is a process in place. My dad was the vice president of Ford Motor Company for 12 years. They have a process in terms of there has to be 1,200 cars made per day. That's rigid. It has to be rigid.
Yes.
But other businesses, if it doesn't have to be like that, I think having and being open-minded and understanding that it is going to take some time to adjust to how a certain person likes to work. My friend from high school, Henri Pierre-Jacques, just started Harlem Capital. They're a $100 million fund that invests in minority-owned businesses and underrepresented founders. He does not start his day as the CEO and founder of that company until 11 o'clock at night, but he works till 2 a.m. So to Amanda's point, how his work gets done is how it gets done. But as long as it's getting done, you can't build a $100 million fund without doing and working hard. He just chooses to do it around the way he likes to work.
And I think it's really interesting because the challenge you have, I suppose, on one level with this hybrid model of work, or whatever we want to call it now, there is that kind of challenge of isolation, right? There's the kind of the connection piece, and there's something that we like in PepTalk we're very passionate about, is the kind of the concept of the importance of communication, connection, and belonging. And we have a thing, like we do something we call a team check-in. And what we try to do with that is wherever you're working, whatever you're doing, we get an opportunity as a leader to team into our app, or into as we build out our product into a platform where all the team can do a check-in together, and you get a sense, you get a measurable of where you're at as a team and as individuals within that team on a scale. So it's kind of like, are you anxious? What are your blind spots? Are you feeling positive about where you're at? Is there a struggle? Of the simple principle being that if as a leader, that people are anxious, or they're disengaged, or they're not quite where you want them to be, well, knowledge is king, right? Knowledge is power. So if you know about it, you then have the option of doing something about it. What we recommend is a thing we call a team talk, which is where you kind of sit down, at 10 minutes in a meeting once a month, sit down with them and just have a conversation, like a human conversation where you actually connect. And usually it's off the back of what the check-in is telling us, but it's also kind of thinking about what's going on in the world. And like, for example, in June, we might just have a conversation about pride and what pride means for people, so that people who have no access or no exposure to that kind of world get an opportunity to have a conversation with somebody and learn a little bit of what's going on in the world. It could be a conversation around Black Lives Matter. It could be a conversation around workplace stress, or setting up your home office, it doesn't really matter. But it's about bringing teams together, having a conversation. And for me, I think it's really interesting to think about, and Benny, I might come back to you actually, if you don't mind, just about managing, working, or coaching a team or a corporate environment where the culture or the engagement isn't good, and how you've seen or how you've helped someone to kind of navigate that and almost rebuild it or repair it.
Yeah, I would say when it's professional sports and things aren't going well, and we've lost, I've been on teams where we lost 5-6 games in a row. The way I kind of have helped people reframe that is to understand that they're playing professional sports for a living. Like, keep the main thing the main thing. Yes, we've lost some games, but this is what you dreamed about when you were 8 years old, and now you're living it out. Now we have to correct these things and get better. We have to win, or else none of us are getting paid. But let's understand that we are playing a quote unquote kids game, and let's enjoy today. Let's just focus on today. Don't think about the result on Sunday. For people in the corporate space, I would say getting a list of wins. What is your list of wins? What are all the great things that you've done well as a individual and as a team in the last month, 3 months, 6 months, a year? We tend to focus and create a lot of suffering for ourselves as humans by just focusing on all the things that are going wrong in the culture or the team. But what about all the things that are going right? After games in the NFL, we don't just go straight, if we win or lose, we don't just go straight to, hey, this is what we did wrong. we put all the things that we did right, all the explosive plays. Did we win the game? How many first downs do we have? I mean, the list of wins is incredible. And then what are the things that we didn't do well? And then let's come up a plan of what we're going to do about it. And then let's go execute that thing. So when I think about cultures, even what my dad has taught me in terms of when he was the COO of Jaguar and Land Rover, and he was over in London, and there was a culture gap and a barrier gap in terms of they were losing $250 million. Well, the way he started off that meeting is, hey, we can only get better from here. Now, how do we all do this together? And he gave them, one of the first things he said in the meeting as we were talking about this as I've gotten older is, hey, I'm giving everybody the authority to fail. You will not fail alone. If you fail, then I fail, and we will figure this out together instead of, oh, you did this wrong. Now let me help you correct that. No, you did that wrong, so I did that wrong. So let's correct this together. And that's the way you shift a culture from a losing culture to a winning culture, just from my point of view. I know Marius and Amanda have some thoughts.
Yeah,
on that as well.
Benny, I mean, I think what you're talking about is it's innate, right? It's a human thing, right? Because I can imagine when you're on that losing streak that you just talked about, right? Mm-hmm. Nobody's really happy about that, right? Everybody's up against it. It's a level of, there's probably a level of intensity. There's probably, there's an anxiety, I'm sure, amongst the team and the group, right? I think a lot of the things you turn to in those sorts of things are just human nature. I find exactly the same when we're going through transition or change within an organization. You're dealing with humans, you're dealing with people at the end of the day, and you've got to seek to understand them at that level before you can actually move forward and beyond that, right? Turn the losing streak around, get over the hump of a transition, get back to winning ways, all those sorts of things. I spend an inordinate amount of time as a leader with people seeking to understand where they are right now, right? Where they are right now. If you don't understand where they are right now, you can't possibly try to figure out the future. Maybe you've got to even look into the past, but sometimes that's just, what's the point in that? Because you are where you are. But I think for me, there's a lot of value in spending time with your people. It's difficult in this environment, Niall. I would agree, in terms of the remoteness of the environment. But you just have to overcompensate. You have to really try harder. But I think what I really relate to what Benny said in terms of, trying to get back to the point where you can seek to understand what's going on and sort of give a different perspective to the teams you're in or the group that you're with.
100%.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. And Amanda, I just wonder with you, I mean, one of the things I think is coming up pretty clear to me is I've always hated the phrase soft skills. I think they're essential skills. Like if you can't build relationships with people, you're at nothing. And even with the hardest leaders you could have worked with, they will be so. You can be with guys who are women who are so direct and almost confrontational. But if you respect them and you understand where they're coming from, and there's a clear trust there, then you'll go anywhere for them. And I get the sense, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the sense that that's kind of what the workforce, the workforce of tomorrow, that's a really important thing for them, is this idea that you have trust. And we go back to the social cohesion, trust and purpose thing. But yeah, is that something that you find in your work and with the kind of relationships you have with companies? Is this kind of idea of, they're not soft skills, they're essential?
Yes, they are 100% essential skills. What's interesting to me is that we do a lot of data gathering in our work. We're constantly interviewing. Marius, we actually interview people after they've left a company 6 months prior. We go back and revisit, get some real good answers then. Right. But that's when you get the real stuff. But, one of the things that we find is that these soft skills are essential, but people, when they give themselves a self-assessment on communication, coaching ability as a leader, things like that, they will give themselves pretty high marks. And then I will go in and interview the person that they report into, slightly lower marks. When I actually go in and interview the team that reports into them, it's a different story. So it's really important that we have been so focused on hard skills, project management, certifications, and all of these things, and they are important. But those are management skills. That is managing workflow. I'm looking for leadership skills. Developing soft skills, essential skills, that's human. We're all humans. We need to be leaders. We need leaders who lead humans, not cogs in a wheel. We need to lead humans. That's it.
It's funny, isn't it? It's like what you say makes so much sense, but the reality is that, you know, common sense isn't all that common.
and it takes time.
And it takes time.
It does.
It takes time, and everybody feels like, because we live in this world of instant gratification, that oh no, like, okay, I gave you this one course on leadership skills, you should be a better leader. No, being a better leader is like an everyday thing. Culture is an ongoing thing. Leadership is an ongoing thing. You don't just get the certification and then now you have it. It's a lot of self-reflection. It's a lot of self-awareness, and it's a lot of practice on a day-to-day. It's, you know, we were just talking about before we got on here, marriage. Like marriage, you just don't get married and now everything is great. No, it's a constant process, and you have to work on that every single day, just like you work on yourself. And understanding that you can't just put a Band-Aid on your culture or a Band-Aid on your leadership. No, you have to take the time and understand and assess and then move forward.
Yep.
With that in mind, and I won't ask you what the key skill you need to be a great husband, because, you know, just for Benny is a newlywed, so we were ribbing him before we came on air. But with your coaching hat on, Benny, when you're working with leaders, if somebody says to you, like, what's the silver bullet? Like, what's the one skill we need to work on? Like, where would you kind of be inclined to start with a client?
I start with their strengths. You know, we do a strength assessment. What are you already good at? What do you know, we don't need to reinvent everything, but what are you really good at? Let's operate from a place of strength. It's the way I operate in my business. There are things that I hate doing, back office work, typing up notes. So why would I do that? That doesn't make me, that frustrates me. So when it comes to leadership, or, hey, what's the one thing? What do you already do well? And how do we enhance that? And what part of your leadership, not can you delegate, but can we work on over time? And understanding, hey, this is going to be a process, but let's bring that to the forefront every week. And hey, how did you do with this part? This is what you said you wanted to work on. How did you do with this part? We already know you do this really well, and continue to enhance and come from that place of strength. But, you know, let's pick out one thing over the next 90 days to work on, whether it be yelling, whether it be listening and not, you know, just talking over people. So it could be a whole bunch of different things. And like Amanda was talking about, I think having that assessment too, you're saying one thing as a leader, let me talk to everybody else, and then let me actually observe you and come to your meetings. I think that's where I see the biggest difference is, let me actually come and observe you in a meeting, or let me observe you for a couple of days throughout your work environment and actually see how you're showing up. Because it's one thing, they always say in football, the eye in the sky doesn't lie. If I always used to tell my coach, oh, I was open on that play, I was open, or I could have got the ball, and they would always, they always say, well, we'll check it out on the film just to see if if you're actually saying what you're actually saying is true. And I think that's one of the things that we like to come in and assess. Let me see you every day. Let me see you for a couple of hours and how you show up.
I love that idea. There's a thing I do a lot in my work. I do a lot of kind of leadership training kind of stuff. And I always talk about holding a mirror up. And, you know, people will always tell you that, oh, we have a great culture here, or, you know, I'm a leader who does this or this. But how often do you actually like properly assess yourself? I always think it's a Super Nanny TV show. Hopefully none of you have seen, because it's not really but the one thing that was really interesting was it was about this super nanny coming in to solve parents' problems with their kid, right? But the one thing she used to do was film the parents, you know, basically leave cameras in the house and film the parents for a couple of days, and then come back and sit down with the parents and make them watch what the relationship was like. So they've got this poorly behaved child. Next thing, you're looking at this video, and it's the parents are screaming, and the parents are doing all these things, and the shock on their faces, because nobody has held that mirror up to them to show them who they are. So they're expecting their kid to behave better, but they're behaving appallingly. And it's that kind of simple philosophy of holding that mirror up to yourself. And I think what you say there, Benny, is really interesting. And it's kind of it's something that really strikes a chord with me, because, you know, obviously my background's in psychology. I've worked in kind of the mental skills and the psychology side of things in sport and business for 20 odd years. And I feel like we focus on, and we're designed as human beings to carry the negatives with us. Like the research tells us that we remember accurately about 10% of any experience. So like players in a game coming off a pitch will remember certain aspects of the game. Usually you'll remember the negative. So if you go to hear a talk, you probably remember a little piece of it afterwards, you know, and it might be some really cool quote, but it could be that you had this negative experience and that's the thing in your head and you beat yourself up. But this idea about recognize your strengths, I think is so cool. But Amanda, from your perspective, when you're dealing with companies, so you've got the feedback you're getting from the potential hires, and you're also getting the feedback from the companies doing the recruitment. How do you challenge that? And what is the one skill you think is fundamental, like that needs to be changed in companies and organizations to kind of create these environments that we're talking about for the future?
Well, actually, it was something Benny said, I can't remember, like 10 minutes ago. He brought up a specific leadership skill that I think is the #1 most underrated leadership skill. It's empathy. 100% it's empathy. We have taught leaders to be managers. We have not taught them that being a human being at work is important. And so bringing that empathy in so that you can understand, okay, you know, we're now having burnout issues across the workforce, massive burnout issues. This is something that I'm hearing daily. Mental health issues. Again, I'm hearing this daily. And, you know, I'm hearing about leaders that are having like yelling matches, or not even matches, really, just constant yelling about production, but they know nothing else about what's going on. And so that's something that we need to be developing. It's something we need to hold a mirror up and say, okay, are we just promoting cogs in a wheel, or are we promoting a humanness at work? And I think that empathy is the thing that turns that around. And that's something that has to come from leadership.
Absolutely. And Marius, from your perspective, as the C-suite guy in the call, it's not always easy. And like when you're under pressure, and when there's there's productivity demands and pressure, and you know time is running out, and you're trying to balance the performance of your team with the relationships in the team and all that kind of stuff. What do you think is the biggest challenge, or what's the biggest solution, I suppose? Like, as somebody who embraces this philosophy, what's the biggest challenge for you in bringing that to life in a company and not losing when things get tough?
Sure. There was Benny, I'm going to go back to your answer earlier on, because there was so much in that. Amanda, you picked out one thing. A word that you mentioned, Benny, was listening, right? As a skill for any leader to have. And where I think it relates to what you're asking, Niall, is that invariably when you hit, you know, and again, probably the experience of all of our lifetimes probably is going to have been the pandemic. And when you hit that when you hit that wall, when you hit that crisis point, it's very easy as a leader to jump into, and quite often you do have to, but you jump into, you know, action, and you jump into, I've got to, you know, make decisions, and I've got to give direction, and I've got to really be really active. I think that's actually the time to listen, Niall, frankly. And And I would spend an inordinate amount of time in those times of crisis periods just doing that. Like just, because you mentioned, I mean, you talked about asking questions, great leaders ask questions. They do, right? But great leaders then listen, right, to the answer. They don't think, oh, you know, they don't think I'm not getting the answer I want from the question I'm asking, so I'm just going to go do that anyway. Look, I'm not saying that doesn't have a place in leadership. Sometimes it does, right? Sometimes you just have to break through. But for the most part, if you ask questions, you better be prepared to listen, and you may not like what you hear, and you've got to be prepared to seek to understand at a different level. So anytime a perfect example for me, I'd go back again, talk to Benny's point around, you know, when we miss quota, right? I mean, like, look, it's not the end of the world. Yes, we are running a business. We do not want to do that too often. But, you know, quite often you can get into this mindset that that's a crisis and you've got to do something about it. You've got to take action. You've got to be, you know, sort of super active. But sometimes it's just about seeking and understand. Sometimes it's just about listening, ask the right questions, listen to the answers. If you're not getting what you need, ask again, or, you know, sort of seek to understand. It's really, 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 really big. So I think, again, as leaders, we quite often just jump straight into that, you know, sort of, I've got to be the leader, I've got to lead, which has a time and a place, of course. But I think listening is probably the biggest thing for me now. I mean, it's and it is a skill, and it is something you have to work at. You really have to work at it. Both in I would say both in the work environment and you know, sort of the home environment and the family environment as well. Really, really important.
100%.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more with you. And it's fascinating, isn't it? Because it just reinforces the fact that our work life and our personal life are intertwined. You know, like that. All the skills that make you a great leader in the workplace can make you a great partner and a great friend and a great family member, whatever the case may be. I mean, it comes back to Amanda's point about being human. And it really is. It's kind of exciting for me to have a conversation like this, where obviously I'm coming from a certain perspective where I'm a big fan of that kind of stuff. But to hear three people with very different kind of roles in the corporate world with the same philosophy kind of gives you hope that, you know, we're actually doing something right and we're moving in the right direction. I think I'm very conscious of time, so I think the logical thing for me to do is to just throw out one parting thought from each of you about kind of your wish list for the future. Benny, you can go first.
My wish list for the future, I would say, you know, I think Marius and Amanda have kind of really touched on this, you know, throughout the entire thing, is just coming from a place of understanding and empathy and giving yourself as a leader grace. Like, you don't have to have this all figured out tomorrow. This is a constant process, just one day at a time. Take it one day at a time.
Love it.
Oh my gosh. Well, Benny literally lifted thoughts out of my head. I think that's cheating.
It's okay to say what he said.
Well, let me just piggyback on that and just say, absolutely. I think that, you know, understanding, empathy, taking it one day at a time. But honestly, your journey as a leader is a constantly evolving journey, and you just have to show up and do the work every single day. Some days it's going to be prettier than others. Mm-hmm. But, you know, at the end of the day, the goal is to have a team that you retain and they want to stay because of you. And I see that happen every single day. And I want that for everybody.
Yeah, I can absolutely relate to all of that, Benny and Amanda. I hope, Niall, I hope we get back to a place where, and I'm going to sound like an old fogey now. I hope we get back to a place where, you know, patience and perseverance are actually valued, right? Higher than I think they are today, potentially. You know, I've got, when I first started out working, I mean, like, you know, to get a year's experience, it took a year, right? Mm-hmm. And I know, look, that sounds very obvious, okay? And again, common sense, like you've already mentioned now. But I think we've lost some of that, right? And I think, again, patience, perseverance, thinking about a year as an opportunity to get a year's experience, as opposed to, sort of, opting out after 6 months, or, sort of finding something shiny and new after 8 months or 9 months. I'm not saying that those things are there's no place for them, but I would like to see us get back to a place where things like patience, perseverance in your career are valued, or come back into the equation in terms of what's valued ultimately. It would make my life so much easier if those things get back into the lexicon, for sure. Until then, I'm still looking for a baseline, frankly.
Yeah, and I suppose the only word I'd add to that is resilience. It's something that I've done an awful lot of work around, is this understanding of our ability to pivot, and how, things don't always go in a smooth straight line. In fact, no one's success has ever been in a straight line. There's always pivots, and there's always roadblocks, and there's always things that go dramatically wrong. To Benny's point earlier about failure, your greatest successes are usually off the back of your biggest failures, and it's understanding. I have a philosophy I use in my work all the time. It's a quote by Aldous Huxley. It says, "Experience is not what happens to you, it's what you do with what happens to you." And kind of understanding that things, like when we talk about empathy, and we talk about relationships, and we talk about trust and cohesion and purpose and all these things, that we're not talking about a perfect world where everything is, sweetness and light and everything goes your way. It's that things will go wrong. To Benny's point about, losing 5 games in a row, things will go wrong. But if you have that relationship and that empathy and that trust in your relationship with your leaders and your teams, you're more equipped to deal with the things that go wrong, put them in their place, understand that that's just an experience, and now you're going to frame it whatever way you want to frame it and move forward. And I think everything you guys have said today reinforces that message. And it's lovely for me personally to feel like I'm actually on the right track, because you guys are educating me as we go through this conversation. I want to thank you all for taking part. It's been a fabulous conversation. Really, really enjoyed it. I do want to call out one thing for anyone listening, that, again, throwing a plug, PepTalk are running an offside leadership workshop in the Aviva Stadium on the 12th of October. It's going to be a very cool day, lots of interesting speakers and lots of interesting kind of opportunities to experience, to check in, and the team talk and all the things we talked about earlier. And if anybody's interested in that, they can go to the peptalk.com website /manager. All the information is there. Marius, Amanda, Benny, thank you so much for taking part. It's been an absolute blast. And there's a good chance we'll have you guys back on in the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye on your emails. Don't put me into spam.
Appreciate you guys, Amanda.
Thank
Marius,
you guys.
thank you.
Yeah, really nice to meet you guys.
Wonderful to meet you.
Thank you very much.